Well, we're getting ready for the unofficial, almost official Great American Holiday next Sunday. Yeah, the Super Bowl. Now, I don't know who's going to win the Super Bowl, and frankly, I don't really care. I don't really like either team, and I'm not a betting person, but if I were, I don't think I'd bet against the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and all the rest. I don't know what it is, but the last few years, it seems like the Chiefs seem to pull out every single close one score game that they have. I mean, a few years ago, Buffalo was up by three with 13 seconds left in the game. I thought, well, this is a win. Nope. Chiefs went down half the field and kicked a tying field goal and won in overtime. And they have now won 17 straight one-score games. I mean, that's crazy. And while some people, sometimes me included, seem to lean into some of these conspiracy theories and think that maybe the refs are always favoring the Chiefs somehow or another, I don't think it's probably really the case. I think they're just that good. They got a clutch coach, a clutch quarterback, a clutch defense, and they're so clutch that if there's any time left, you figure, well, the Chiefs are going to score and they're going to win the game. And if you're a fan of the team that's facing the Chiefs, well, you seems like all you can do is sometimes helplessly scream at the TV and rant at the refs afterwards for the calls that they made, because your team seems to be helpless to stop the inevitable. And you want to have hope that your team can prevail, but given the Chiefs' track record, that hope seems almost pointless. Now that's just sports. And in the big scheme of things, that's really not that big of a deal. But there are lots of situations in life that are a big deal. And that can leave you feeling sort of helpless and hopeless when you're dealing with them. Sort of like that story from Luke chapter 7 that Luke reports in his book about the life and ministry and mission of Jesus. Let me take you back there again, Luke chapter 7. Soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. "Don't cry," he said. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." And then the dead boy sat up and began to talk. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Great fear swept the crowd, and they praised God, saying, "A mighty prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people today." So the woman that Jesus meets outside this village of Nain is a widow. And now she's in another funeral procession for her family. And so she knows about loss. And if you've ever lost anybody, you know that there can be those moments of where you seem a little helpless and a little hopeless. I mean, you are helpless to stop their death from coming, and you are a little hopeless about what the future means for life without them. If you've lost a spouse, you know that's even more intense. And if you've ever lost a child or known someone who has, maybe that intensity wraps up even more, because the way we're used to looking at things, it's like, well, the child is supposed to outlive the parent. And this woman has experienced both of those, right? She's a widow who's already buried her husband. And now she's burying her one and only son. And that probably, let me tell you what that probably meant for her in Jesus' time. I mean, being a widow is hard, no matter what century that you're living in. But while her son is alive, she still has some safety and security and support. See, the woman's son here was her social safety net. Because in Jesus' time, women relied heavily on their male relatives for support. So without him, she's really in trouble. The death of her only son left her in a really vulnerable position. Without a husband or a son, she's got nobody to provide for her or to protect her or to ensure her well-being. The woman's present, bluntly put, stunk. And her future prospects were pretty bleak, not only because her heart doubly hurt and ached at both those losses, and that's a hole that's really hard to climb out of, but also because with the death of her husband and her son, she probably faced a life of isolation and a life of poverty. And most people would probably ignore her. Because even in a communal society like this one was, people tend to shy away from people that are on the fringes and leave them to deal with their stuff all by themselves. But Jesus doesn't do that. Right? Jesus doesn't shy away from people on the fringes. He doesn't shy away from people who are hurting. He doesn't shy away from people who've experienced pain and loss. Jesus loves everyone. And he's for everyone, even those who are on the fringes, especially when, like this woman here, they feel helpless and they feel hopeless. Because Jesus has the help and the hope that they need. And so as you read the story again, down at verse 13, Luke reports this. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. Jesus has compassion here. In our day, we'd say his heart went out to her. All right, his heart went out. But the word that Luke uses here is actually a lot more graphic than that. We kind of literally would say his guts spilled out. And what it's saying here is that there was this deep-welled compassion at the core of Jesus being here, and an outpouring of mercy and compassion that resulted in action. See, Jesus doesn't just hurt for her here. That's sympathy or empathy, and Jesus certainly has that. But Jesus' compassion resulted in action. Jesus' compassion resulted in action, and so he doesn't just hurt for her, he also helped her. Right? He came near, and Jesus actually raised her son from the dead. And if you're in one of those helpless or hopeless situations, even if you don't get a resurrection that you see, what that means to you is that here's what Jesus does. He brings help and he brings hope to a place of hurt. Jesus brings help and he brings hope to a place of hurt, and he speaks life into a place of death. And in so doing, he brings hope to what seems like a helpless and a hopeless situation. And in fact, to the person who's read Luke's whole account of the life and ministry of Jesus, and some of you probably have, well, that this is one more hint that Luke's giving us, that Jesus is actually coming to fix the mess that sin made of God's perfect world. And he's coming to repair and restore all the things that were broken. And that what Jesus would end up doing that, by the way, by being broken himself, through his death on the cross, and then changing what was the expected end of the story. I mean, you don't expect to come back from death, but Jesus did. He raised himself from the dead, and so speaks life and hope into a place of death and despair. And seeing that also leads the reader of Luke's whole story, like we are here, to make some other connections. And you start thinking, so here Luke raises this woman's son. And then in the very next chapter, he writes about raising Jairus' daughter. And then at the end of the story, he raises himself from the dead. And the reader starts thinking, well, if Jesus could raise the woman's son and Jairus' daughter and himself, well, then Jesus has the power to raise me and my family and my friends and all those that I've lost, and anyone who believes in him as Lord and Savior and rescuer and Redeemer. See, this event helps you see that Jesus has the kind of power that you need to bring hope and healing to hurting people. And it helps you see that Jesus has the compassion to deal with people when they're feeling hopeless and helpless. And that even if you're on the fringes or the margins of society, that Jesus actually is here to help and to give you hope. And that Jesus speaks life into places of death and speaks light into places of darkness and brings healing and restoration into places of brokenness and brings help and hope into places of despair. I mean, that's who Jesus is, and that's what Jesus has done for us. And perhaps you've experienced the same sort of thing yourself. But that leads me to think of another question. And that's this. Can we do something similar for people who are on the fringes and on the margins, for people who are isolated and maybe despairing, for people that others might ignore and are left to face life's challenges all by themselves? Can we have a part in speaking life into death and light into darkness and bring healing into places of brokenness? I think the answer is yes. But I was watching something this week that made me think that not only is that what Jesus wants us to do, we probably have to change maybe the way we start approaching these Bible conversations and these worship experiences into maybe a little different operating procedures than is kind of like standard operating procedure in church world. For those listening on the podcast, let me describe what people here were seeing as you're just hearing that music in the background. There are people coming out of church after Sunday service, and they're talking about what they heard, and here's the finer points of the message, and they're thinking about brunch, and they're talking with their friends, and they're thinking maybe about coming back next week, and they're not seeing people around them who are on the fringes, who are helpless and hopeless and the lost, the lonely, the addicted, the struggling, the hurting, all those people like this woman in the story who needed help and who needed hope and who weren't getting that. And that's what I mean by maybe if we're going to bring that help and hope to people who need it. See, that what you saw on the screen is standard operating procedure in church. We hear churchy messages. We talk about those churchy messages. We make maybe try to figure out the fine points of what the preacher was talking about. Might even say, oh, that was great, or we might say it wasn't so good. But we're talking about the content, and that's a good thing to do. But sometimes, if that's all we do, if that's what we think that church is, this is more than a spiritual conversation. I think messages are also a call to action. And if we want to bring hope and healing to the world, if we want to show not just the heart of Jesus, but be the hands of Jesus to people that need it, well, then I think we need to do more than just have a conversation. We need to do the same thing that Jesus does and take our compassion and turn it into action. I think that starts with awareness, with actually slowing down your life long enough that you can see those people on the fringes, that you can see those people who are feeling helpless or hopeless and need your help, and to see people that you're actually in a position to give some help to. So I think number one, just be observant. You know, it means be observant and pay attention to the needs around you. Sometimes the helpless are those who are most overlooked. So think about this maybe as you leave today. Who are the people around you that are in a position of helplessness or hopelessness? Maybe it's someone facing a challenge like a single parent trying to provide for their family, or elderly people who are isolated and lonely, or individuals experiencing homelessness, or people battling chronic illness and disease, or refugees and immigrants who are struggling to find a new place in a new society. Those are just a few examples. I mean, just slow down and open your eyes and take time to notice the people around you and people who need some help and some hope. And then, figure out how to turn awareness into action. And part of turning awareness into action, I think, requires a little bit of divine intervention. At least it does for me. And what I mean by that is, see, our natural default is inertia. It's to turn inward and just see me and think about my stuff. And so I need to ask Jesus for help. That's what I meant by divine intervention. I need to ask Jesus, well, help me see what you see. Help me see the people that you see. Help me see people the way you see people. And show me what I can do to help. And then give me the humility to do it. Now, why do I say humility there? Well, to turn awareness into action often requires getting your hands a little dirty. And sometimes doing some things that might cost you something, that even might, others in your circles might look down on a little bit. Here's an example that's right in this story. In the time and place that Jesus lived, going up for Jesus and touching the casket, that could make him ritually unclean. And that was a no-no. I mean, you can almost see a lot of people would think that Jesus is crazy for doing this. Leave it to the professionals. Leave it to the professional and those paid mourners and the professionals there. Let them do their job and stay out of the way. But Jesus here takes the risk. Right? Jesus takes this risk and enters that situation on the fringes, and he actually goes up and touches the casket. But he kind of flipped the story there, because instead of being defiled, Jesus actually heals and cleanses, and he brings purity to an unclean situation. And followers of Jesus can do the same thing. We can humble ourselves like Jesus did and take the risk, not just to show Jesus' heart, but to turn compassion into action and actually start to be Jesus' hands. How do you do that? How do you turn your compassion into action like Jesus did? I think here's a few possibilities. One is simply showing empathy. Showing empathy meaning take the time to listen to someone's story. Take the time to listen to their stories and understand their struggles. A lot of times empathy's the first step to a meaningful action. Remember, they feel isolated and alone, and you're seeing and listening, and that's a step. Might be something like, if you can, providing some support, offering some tangible help. It might be providing food, might be financial assistance, might be helping with transportation. Small little acts of kindness can make a big difference. Might be advocating for others. See, those who are helpless and hopeless are those often who have no voice, who cannot speak for themselves. So you can use your voice to advocate for them and for people and policies and programs or whatever that provides aid. And then you can build like relationships with people. Remember, loneliness is one of those things that really makes people feel helpless and hopeless. Uh, a supportive community around them can bring hope and healing into that desperate situation. And then I'd say just, for me, I got to keep on reflecting how I'm doing. Because the natural pull, again, is to do nothing, to not see all those people on the screen that are there, especially to do nothing for people on the fringes. So if I want to give help and hope to those who need it most, like Jesus did, I probably need to ask myself regularly stuff like, well, am I consistently looking for ways to help? And what can I do to improve my efforts to help? And how can I do it within my own community to make a difference? Because when I do that, when I take the time to bring help and hope to people who need it most, like this woman that Jesus encountered today, I- I'm not only helping to create a more caring and compassionate world, I am, but I'm also following Jesus. And when I'm doing that, I'm helping other people see Jesus a little more clearly. And you know what? I think that's why we serve.